I'm curious about the taking notes because as long as I've known you, you've taken notes. As a homeschooler, I was brought up to think that taking notes and learning something was a currency. And I really admired that. And I realized even when I was young and I didn't have any money resources, that ideas were a currency. And oddly enough, I've ended up creating my lifestyle now and my living based off of that currency. So, share with me at the very first time when you realized, because you said you were taking notes and making book reports as a kid, but tell me about when you very first recognized that ideas were, in fact, the currency.
Well, I don't know that in the beginning that I saw it that way. I innately wanted to excel. And so understanding things and being informed of things and learning how things worked were just important to me. I had one brother who was 5 years older than I am, and he was very intelligent, and I wanted to be in some respects like him. So I would read his books. I remember one Christmas, he got the complete works of Shakespeare. And so when I was in junior high school, I went through the complete works of Shakespeare because I felt that would be valuable. And in those formative years, I went through and read all of the classics. That's just kind of how I formed my reality, was extracting the best ideas from all of the great literature. And as I look back, that literature wasn't so great in a lot of respects. A lot of it was sort of negative, and the works of Shakespeare, although written beautifully, the stories don't have really good endings, and there's a lot of characters in the stories that are depraved, and I probably wouldn't read that kind of thing today because I like to live on a more positive note. I was very selective in my book reports. I only wanted to do things that were valuable to me, things that I could use in my own life. So that's how I differentiated things.
How did you decide for you what was meaningful and what was just kind of something that could be left by the wayside?
Well, I've gained a lot of insight over the years. So at the time, I didn't have the full understanding that I do today. I didn't, in a lot of ways, I didn't come from an ideal situation in that my parents were not very well educated. We were relatively poor on the economic scale. So a lot of the perspectives that I gained early on were not ideal. I have experienced things through the years. I realized that there's a better way to live with forming your own opinions and your outlooks that are based on different principles. So I began to put together the things that I felt were valuable to me. And if I wanted to grow and progress and become like the person I wanted to be, these were the kinds of things that I want to remember and I want to incorporate into my life. I was not introduced to self-help, the genre. All I knew is that it was something that I wanted to incorporate into my life. And so that's the distinction that I made. Is this valuable to me? Can I implement it or not? When I did my book reports, they reflected that belief system that I wanted to incorporate these ideas and become a better person.
When you made the decision that something was of value to you, was it made on an intellectual perspective or a gut instinct perspective?
Well, I'm sure it was both. Like I say, we learn from our experiences as well as our knowledge base in our mind. So I've gone through several environments in my life where military service and corporations, and I've seen the characteristics of people. I just began to differentiate between sort of what was the natural flow for people who didn't really have a design or a blueprint for their life, and to see the stark difference between people who were successful and who were intelligent and had put their act together. Making those differentiations were important to me, and I began to differentiate between lifestyles and belief systems. I suppose it's a look into reality. How do you define reality? It's really different for every person. Every person creates their own reality, the world that they live in, by the decisions that they make and the opinions that they have, how they're influenced by the news media or the culture in which they live. I've always been kind of a rebel at heart, I guess. That's why we did homeschool when homeschool was against the law in the state where we lived. I felt that homeschool was a better option than the public school system, and we had more of a handle on what was taught and how it was taught, and we could express our own value system in the educational process. Yeah, all of those things were very formative in me and how I put my world together.
One of the things I appreciate the most about going through the homeschooling system, even if it was against the law, is that I learned how to think. And one of the philosophies that I was brought up with, and I'm not sure where you picked it up and when you picked it up, and I'm going to ask you about that. But I was really keenly aware that you were really focused on and encouraged us to question everything. And so an idea would be presented, or we would read something in a book, or we would hear something at church, or the neighbors would say something. And the goal was to question everything. Is this true? Does this apply to me? How am I supposed to use this in my life? Is this part of the goodness of mankind, or is this the badness of mankind? And it's really interesting because to this day, I still question everything. Instead of just taking something like, oh, that's what we're doing now. I stop and I'm like, really? Is this what we're doing now? Is this what we should be doing now? Where did you come up with that? And maybe how old were you when you started realizing that instead of just accepting the status quo, you were going to challenge things and you were going to have your own formulated opinion?
I think it's a combination of things, really. When I was young, there were members of my family who were they used tobacco and alcohol and pretty rough language. And so at an early age, I decided that I didn't want any of those things to be a permanent part of who I was. And I was very careful as I started my own family to introduce a different reality where there was kind of a clear cutoff line of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. In our home, for example, we determined what kind of music we wanted to listen to. And all of the kids wanted to listen to their own radio stations, and we had hard rockers and all different kinds of things. And I basically said, you live here at home, you're in my kingdom, and I want my kingdom to be this way. So we presented beautiful music. Music is a powerful way to influence how we think about things, what we remember. We tried to control that, and we controlled the language in our home. We didn't allow fighting. My wife was the second oldest of 16 children, and so she had amassed a great amount of wisdom in how to raise children and how to schedule work projects and assign things, inspections, and how everything is to be done so that a family can operate smoothly. I'm a quick learner in some things, so we just applied all of the correct principles that we knew in raising our own family.